For the purpose of the stream, hello, my name is Kay Tempest Bradford. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author. I am also co-teacher of several of our Writing the Other classes alongside Nisi Shawl. I'm going to have Nisi introduce themselves again. There was a little bit of a snafu with our streaming, so I want to have them introduce themselves again. And I've been teaching Writing the Other since 2014, which is not as long as Nisi has been teaching it. Nisi?
Right. I think I've been teaching it since 2004, so maybe 10 years before you came into it. I wrote the book with my friend Cynthia Ward, and I also wrote Everfair. I'm now working on a sequel. I live in Seattle. I yeah. I edit stuff. I edited New Suns and a Locus finalist anthology, and there you go.
Nisi has done a many thing, and she is the one who's responsible for making all this Writing the Other stuff happen. So thank you, Nisi. All right, so you all have come here today to learn about how to be an ally, and we are going to talk for about a half an hour or so because we have some stuff that we've prepared for talking about this. But then the rest of our webinar time is going to be for questions from you. And we'll go over, once question time comes, I'll go over the question procedure again, but just so you are aware, wait on your questions until after we have finished our talk. I don't want to call it a lecture. It's more of a talk. It's a conversation. Hi. So we're going to go over basically some of the major steps for how to ally. And then as we get your questions, we're going to be able to go a little bit more specific and a little bit deeper. We're just going to try to lay the foundation so that we can give you a good setup for questions. Okay. So step one in how to be an ally is identifying gaps in your knowledge or understanding, and then filling those gaps. So that's all cool and everything, but like how does one do that, Nisi?
Well, I think that it's a good idea to realize that you probably do have gaps. So right there, you're starting off. And then the next thing you do is shut up and listen, which it's not like you're just going to be silent and condone everything that's going on around you. You want to make sure and let people know that what you are doing is paying attention to what's going on. You're observing rather than just hiding. So tell people that you are listening, and that will help them understand what you're doing.
Yeah, that's got to be like the biggest thing that one can do as an ally to any marginalized group. Because one of the things that unfortunately tends to happen is that people from marginalized communities are not listened to about their own experiences. And even people who say that they are allies, who claim to be allies, will then act as if they know better how to deal with oppression of the marginalized person than the marginalized person does. So if you
Yeah.
listen, if you step back and don't speak and listen, you're going to be able to avoid that particular problem. And one of the ways that you can shut up and listen is social media, which has its downsides and upsides. But following people from marginalized groups, particularly activists, people who are they may not be always doing activism, they may not be professional activists, but people who are doing making activist tweets and talking about oppression and talking about what it means to be from that marginalized identity. That is one way to listen, and you follow them and you read their tweets and you look at the links that they like, and you also follow the people that they have RT'd or shared or whatever. You're going to be able to build a really good network of people who are going to like just by being who they are on social media will help you understand some stuff, and give you insight, because there's no one marginalized person who could be like, I speak for all the X people, I speak for all Black people, I speak for all women, I speak for all whatever, right? Like no one person. So you need to follow multiple people who can show you like all these different nuances, because there are so many nuances to dealing with oppression and prejudice and whatever, that you need to follow multiple people so that you can start to build a better picture of how to understand their marginalization, and then how to be a useful person to help end the oppression, to help mitigate the prejudice and things of that nature.
Here's an example of listening as opposed to not listening. There was a program in Detroit. I'm from Michigan, so this kind of hit close to home. There was a program in Detroit where the city had money to help plant trees in blighted urban areas. So all that people had to do was say, yeah, come and plant a tree on my lot, and you know, they would get the money set aside, and then they could spend the money on the tree. And there were no takers. And why? Because no one had bothered to ask these people, would you like some trees? What kind of trees? Do you think that the city should be the one that administers this, or maybe, you know, the YMCA, or, you know, something else, a church group? What? Nobody had asked them, so there was zero participation until, lo and behold, someone got the bright idea of maybe we should find out what these people want. And then the program gradually became more accepted in the community, because it was a program that was developed based on what the community wanted.
Yeah, asking is huge, and when you ask, take the answer at face value.
Yep, it couldn't possibly mean that.
What else in identifying gaps in your knowledge or understanding?
Well, doing a lot of research, actually. This is the kind of thing that it comes up when people are saying, well, I don't know what racism is, or I don't know any Black playwrights, or that kind of thing. You can actually look for that.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually look for blog posts, look for books. Of course, you could, you know, take a writing the other course, read writing the other, do the exercises.
Well, that's
But
the next step.
generally,
That's the next step.
but yeah, you should actually like do some homework yourself. That's my advice.
Yeah. Some books that have been mentioned a lot recently, White Fragility. And of course, I forgot to write down the author of White Fragility, but I think that if you search Amazon for White Fragility as the title, you will find it. A lot of people are talking about that book as a good book for starting to understand issues of racism, so that you can then, you know, once you've filled those gaps, you will better understand how to help. Also, there's a book that a lot of people have been talking about, and I will admit I haven't read this book, but a lot of people have said really good things about it. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And I'm going to put, hopefully in the chat, you guys will be able to see this, but I'm going to put this person's name in the chat. Come on, chat, open, thank you. And just so you all know, we will send out an email with a list of any resources that we have mentioned, so that you don't necessarily have to keep track of all of them, because there's going to be a couple of Twitter threads that I mentioned that it's easier if I just like, we're going to send you an email later with a link to the recording, and also with any resources. So yeah, like those books are ones that are really good for like helping you start that journey. Anything else under step one, Nisi?
Nothing that I can think of.
Okay. All right. So step 2, when you are trying to be a good ally, is getting reality checks. Uh, and this is why I was like, reading and writing the other book is step 2, because you want to get a reality check. But I guess it is also under step 1, because it's helping you fill, in the gaps. But when you are getting reality checks, that means that you have to start learning how to not only understand what's going on, but like how you can apply what you understand to your sphere of influence. So this class was pitched, to writers and other creative people, and that is a lot of what we're going to specifically talk about. Our advice is going to go to that. And so, if you're a writer or creative person, then taking classes so that you can understand how to represent groups well in your chosen art, or how to work with representation in your profession, because I know a lot of you are editors as well. How to go beyond stereotypes. That is, really, that's how you get that reality check, because you're going to be taking those classes from people who hopefully understand all the complexities of this, and they can walk you through it, and they can give you ways to learn for yourself, like how to deal with representation and all the complications that come with like dismantling stereotypes in your head, and that sort of thing. So obviously we give classes like that for writers, and our classes are for mainly prose writers, but they also work for playwrights, game writers, script writers, stuff like that. But we are not the only ones who give classes like this, and we also know that there are other classes like this for other creative, artistic professions. So if you are a visual artist, I'm sure that there are classes you could take that can talk about, like, the differences between shading a person of color versus shading a white person. If you are a dancer, talking about the different ways that dance has been culturally appropriated, or how to not culturally appropriate with your dance performance. All these things, like, those are out there, they're available, and you should definitely like seek them out and take advantage of them as much as you can.
I have a friend who did that with, she's a makeup artist, and she learned that doing makeup on people of color, and especially African descended people, uh, you use different colors for the blush, hello, and for highlighting cheekbones. And for instance, so there are classes that are specific to whatever your discipline is.
Mm-hmm. And for writing, there are a lot of ways to think about approaching representation respectfully, which is part of being a good ally, is to work on it both in your own art and also in the culture at large. But when we're talking about like working on your own art, one of the things that people ask us a lot is about, should I, as a person from the dominant paradigm, from I'm white, or I'm male, or I'm able-bodied, or whatever, should I be writing characters that come from these different identities, or different races or whatnot? And it's complicated, the answer to that. But author Hiromi Goto summed it up really, really nicely in their guest of honor speech from WisCon a few years ago. Do you want to read that quote, Nisi?
This is a long one, because they're talking about stories. Stories are powerful devices, and like all powerful devices, they are capable of doing great harm as well as great good. Writing a story is the act of inscribing a specific vision, but in inscribing the specific story she'd like to share, the writer exerts her control. In doing so, she eliminates the possibilities of other inclusions. So writing stories can be simultaneously an act of creating as well as an act of exclusion. It is my hope that white writers who are interested in writing about cultures and subjectivities outside their own consider very carefully: one, how many writers from the culture you wish to represent have been published in your country, writing in the same language you will use, such as English, to write the story. 2, why do you think you're the best person to write this story? 3, who will benefit if you write this story? 4, why are you writing this story? 5, who is your intended audience? And 6, and this is a really important one, if the people slash culture you're selecting to write about has not had enough time historically and structurally to tell their story, their own story first, on their own terms, should you be occupying this space? So yeah, being an ally in the creative arts does mean asking yourself these hard questions. Should you be occupying this space? Should you be telling the story? Should you be writing from this perspective? I mean, don't just ask me in Tempest. Ask yourself.
Yeah, and it's that work is hard. Like any work that you're going to do to dismantle not only the prejudices that exist in our culture, but also the prejudices that exist in your head. And sometimes those prejudices exist because you exist in a culture that feeds you this information, right? Like it's all coming at you, and you imbibe it without necessarily realizing it because you've been imbibing it for as long as you've been able to think. And so you have to dismantle it in your head as well as dismantling it out in the world. And it starts by asking yourself those questions. And those questions are hard. Like all of this work is hard. Like we're not gonna like try to tell you, it's like, no, this is easy. You just, no, there's no you just. Like all of this is very hard. So asking yourself those questions, it can be difficult. And it can also be difficult to know if you've reached the right answer, but you have to do that work within yourself first before you then like try to ask other people to help you do the work. You've got to like set the foundation in yourself first. And sometimes when you are asking yourselves these questions, you're asking, should you be occupying this space? Should you be telling this story? Sometimes the answer that you're going to come up with is no, that you shouldn't. And sometimes when you ask someone else, which we'll get to in a second, if you should be telling this story, if you should be occupying this space, sometimes someone else will tell you, no, you shouldn't. And if that's the answer, you have to respect it. And you have to sit with it. Especially if someone who is from the identity that you're trying to portray in your writing, in your art, says to you, this is not your story to tell. This is not an aspect of culture for you to bring to an audience from your point of view. That's really hard. And sometimes that's what the answer is going to be. And just know that there's also probably a really good reason for them to say that to you. Perhaps the reason is that historically that group has just, everybody has done the wrong thing, and they're like, nope, we're tired of it. We don't want any more people like dealing with it. We're done, like, right. And sometimes they've had to claw themselves back to just even being able to tell their own stories. And so they're like, no, your ancestors, people from your group, whatever, they have already done too much. So we're going to keep this. There's always a good reason behind it. So you got to respect that answer.
Sensitivity readers, cultural consultants. Again, this is a case of, well, listen, especially if you're doing as we suggest and offering some form of compensation for the work of paying attention to, of reviewing what you're doing in your creative work. So my niece did a cultural sensitivity consult for someone. She's an African-American teenager. She's pansexual. She was reading this man's novel, and she had to tell him, you can't do this. And why is this woman a maid when you set this in 1990? And there are other jobs that Black people held besides house cleaners, and she had to tell him all this hard stuff. But she's okay. She's good at doing that kind of stuff. And he had to listen. He had paid her. He needed to get his money's worth, and his money's worth involved shutting up and listening.
Yeah. Cultural consultants and sensitivity readers are often going to be the ones who are telling you, no, don't do that. And yeah, you gotta listen. Even if what they're telling you is something that you don't want to hear. But that is the way that you begin to do the work. Because one of the things that I have found, especially as I've done cultural consulting for different places, is that whenever I get a chance to see the end result, the end result is always better than what they gave me. And sometimes, it's not as if some people are giving me like terrible novels or whatever, and they're like, please fix this horrible novel I wrote. No, like they're giving me things that are actually like pretty good, but they just have, these problems with, the way that they've characterized somebody who comes from an identity that I understand about. And so I'm able to like give them tools to understand what they're doing wrong, which means that they're going to have to like tweak some of what they're doing. But as with a lot of great art, like as soon as you're like, oh, you can't do that, or, here's a restriction, or you have to rethink this, then that kind of pressure sometimes brings out the greater thing. And so the novel ends up being even better than it was before, because now these other elements are coming to the fore and they're making it stronger. So always think of it that way, is that if you have to ask somebody from that group to help you, that they're going to help you to make whatever you've written even better. It's never going to be worse because you took out the horrible stereotypes and cliches. Like, that's not going to make it worse. It's only going to help you to make it better. Anything else on that, Nisi?
Oh gosh, just want to reiterate, a good ally does ask their sensitivity reader or cultural consultant how they are going to be compensated for their work. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Always compensate people. And always be sure that that what you're asking them is commensurate with what you can offer them in payment. A lot of writers worry about this because they're like, well, but I don't have this many, hundreds of dollars to pay a cultural consultant. And that's real, and I understand it. But sometimes that means you may have to wait until you do have the money. Sometimes it means that like you can speak to them about what compensation other than money might be acceptable to them. Maybe you have something else to offer. But always let them take the lead on that. But sometimes, yeah, you just got to wait until you can pay for it, or maybe your publisher or the gallery or whoever can
get a grant.
Yeah, you can get a grant to pay for it. So, but yeah, you got to pay your sensitivity readers. And yeah, so that's how you get reality checks.
Yeah.
We'll have some resources for you, some other videos that you can watch, and also some blog posts to read about sensitivity reading to help you with that. Oh, and here's a question that we know will come, because it always gets asked: where do I find a sensitivity reader? There used to be a sensitivity reader database. There is not anymore, because too many people abuse the sensitivity readers that they found on the sensitivity reader database. We have one that's going to go live soon. But it's only for people who take our core classes, because that's one of the ways that we are trying to cut down on abuse of sensitivity readers, is by limiting it to people who have taken our core classes. There is the Conscious Style Guide, I think, also has a sensitivity reader database, or at least a way to like find them. But sometimes what you got to do is you got to rely on your network. You're asking friends, if they know somebody who does sensitivity reading, sometimes even asking on social media saying, hey, I'm looking for a sensitivity reader for these areas, for these identities. Does anybody know somebody? And right now that seems to be pretty much the way that it's working, just because the sensitivity reader database had to go away. So that is unfortunately the only help that we can offer you on that point. All right. So after you have identified the gaps in your knowledge or understanding and filled those gaps, and after you have gotten reality checks, next step, step 3 in being a great ally is developing a sense of what you should do to help the people that you want to ally yourself with. Um, and we've already talked about this, but we'll say it again.
Again.
Ask, ask them. Talking to people is best. And you ask them what they need from you, because sometimes what you think they need and what they actually need are two different things, right?
Yep. What kind of trees? You're going to put those trees on my lawn, but yeah, they drop fruit all over. No.
No one wants fruit.
Well, not rotten fruit anyway.
This
So
is
yeah,
true.
so ask what people need.
Yeah. Another thing to do is to take stock of your strengths, like what it is that you have to offer. And I always start out with this talking about how not everyone has to be a warrior, because this is the thing that we see a lot of people out on the internet, right? Like being a warrior and they're yelling at everybody and they're, you know, talking about all the injustices. And, you know, you may look at that and be like, oh, that person is so brave and they're out there like they're fighting a good fight. But that doesn't necessarily have to be everyone. And that doesn't necessarily have to be you if you want to be an ally. You do not necessarily have to be on Twitter 24/7 yelling at fascists, unlike me. So a few years ago, I was at a writing conference and author Stephen Barnes was talking about how cultures and communities need to take care of their warriors, because you know, even if we're talking about the social justice warrior who is basically, you know, on social media or in blogs or online or in media or whatever, doing their thing, right? Like that's, it's, you know, they're doing battle with trolls and they're doing battle with like people who are not just sort of gadflies, but like people who are out to cause genuine lasting harm. Okay. Those people, and they're the people that Barnes calls the smiling monsters, who are dedicated to adding toxicity to culture, dedicated to hurting people, particularly marginalized people. And the smiling monsters, like they have to be dealt with, right? And so that is one of the things that warriors do is they go out and they deal with the smiling monsters by refuting them, by exposing their terribleness, by, you know, putting out information that counteracts their disinformation and things like this. And, you know, artists and communities should always be in the business of pushing out trolls, right? And ignoring the toxic stuff that trolls spread so that they can spend more time building community and making art, right? That speaks to truths. And so, you know, some artists, they're warriors as well, but some artists aren't. You know, some artists are the people who need to stand on the perimeter, right? And they dismantle what the smiling monsters are trying to build. But the warriors are paying a price. They're paying a physical price sometimes, even if they're literally not like going somewhere protesting, you know, dealing with cops who are reacting to them. But like there's like a blood pressure, stress, heart toll that comes with all of this. There's an emotional toll that comes with all of this work. And so, one of the things that you can do as a good ally is to be a person who, as Stephen Barnes puts it, welcomes the warrior back to the fire and embraces them and and begins the healing process that warriors need, because warriors need to know that the community that they're trying to protect cares about them. They don't just care about the work that they do, but they care about them as people. That is just as important. So if, you know, part of being an ally is to create a space where warriors can come and they don't have to think about the thing that they've been fighting, and they don't have to think about having to battle you over whether or not, you know, this one aspect of prejudice is real or just made up. Like they need places where they can just not do that. And that is one thing that you can do as an ally. You can give them that space. You can give them breaks. You can help heal their wounds, whether they're emotional wounds, psychic wounds, whatever, and thank them for the battles that they fight on the community's behalf. You can be a person providing a healing place for a warrior, because being a warrior isn't for everyone. And being a warrior is not like the sort of like highest level thing you can do in this fight. It is just a thing that people can do, but there are other things that you can do.
You have to think about yourself. You have to realize, what your experience is, what your predilections are, what you've been trained to do. If you have a background in finance, then you can help people with getting business loans to run their publishing house. Or if you have a background in Hollywood, then you can help people get their films made or distributed. So think about your professional training, think about your emotional background, and think about, come up with an actual list of ways that you can offer to people. Again, you're going to ask them. You're not going to just say, well, I'm doing this for you. But come up with sort of like an inventory, a personal inventory of what you can offer.
Yes, definitely. One of the things that has been going around a lot on Twitter recently is the difference between sponsorship and mentorship, and how, a lot of times when stuff like this happens and everybody's like, oh no, like we have to think about the fact that, say, Black people are underrepresented in publishing, on the editorial side or even the marketing side, or there are not enough Black people in the museum space, curating things for museums or whatever. Then people are like, oh, we got to get them mentors, like mentorship, like, hey, I'll be over here and I'm mentoring and they're mentoring and everybody's mentoring. But like, and mentoring is great, but like mentoring is not the same as sponsoring. And I'm going to try to load this up in a way that will not crash my computer, so I can read you this really great list of sort of mentor versus sponsorship, so you sort of get the idea. And again, the links to the tweets that I'm talking about will be in the resources. But so with the sponsor, it's like mentors have mentees, like I'm mentoring this person, but sponsors have proteges. A sponsor, for instance, can be a senior level staff member invested in a protege's career success. Sponsors might, depending on the kind of sponsorship you're doing, might promote proteges directly, using their influence and networks to connect them to high profile assignments, people, pay increases, and promotions. Sponsors help drive their proteges' career vision, and they give their proteges their active network connections and make new connections for them. Their sponsors are personally invested in the upward movement of their protege. They champion their proteges visibly, often using their own platforms and reputation as a medium for exposure. And they actively model behavior and involve proteges in experience that enable advancement. So all of that is, and again, like that particular tweet is about more geared toward like business, but even in the creative arts, you can still apply some of those things. You're not just saying, yes, like I'll tell this person about like how to submit a story and how to get an agent and whatever. No, instead you're like, I am super invested in this person's success. I'm going to introduce them to my agent. I'm going to introduce them to my editor. I will offer to blurb their book. Things of that nature. We'll get more into some more concrete things there, but like thinking of your allyship, especially if you are saying, I want to help specific people in my profession, specific people from my school, whatever it is, then thinking more about like how to use a sponsorship framework using your skills and abilities as opposed to a mentorship framework, will mean that there will be more success for the people that you are trying to help, because you're not just saying like, I'm going to give you information. You're saying, I'm going to actually like shepherd you along.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are things that are, you can do that are particular to you. Then there's sort of general things about changing the entire culture that we bathe in, which does sound like a tall order, but hey, it's happening, right? It's going on right now. So as a person with any sort of privilege, like I know that I have privilege, or a person who has influence or who has gained influence, and apparently I've got that, you want to raise up these voices that are being pushed down and pushed aside. So we've got this whole list of stuff that anybody can do. I'll start. You can purchase books and comics by marginalized authors. Just go out there and get them. Rosarium Publishing, for instance, has a huge list of comics by people of color, women, marginalized voices. Yeah, go for those.
I'm writing down to make sure we mention that. The other thing is like, go out of your way to read literature or consume other art by marginalized creators. And when you do this, I mean, like, set a goal for a certain number of works per month or per year by authors of a particular demographic group. I gained internet fame, notoriety, infamy, whatever you want to call it, a few years ago because I was like, hey, for 1 year, don't read books by cisgender, heterosexual white men. And of course, a whole bunch of people were like, how dare you? How racist? You're telling people not to read white men. Oh no. And it's like, yes, whatever. But
Neil Gaiman.
Oh. Right, what will Neil Gaiman do? He'll just sit there crying with his $100 bills. But the point of that was to say that, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied white men from the middle class are really overrepresented in the English speaking literature world. And so I was like, go out and find some people who aren't that. And, they could be a white man, but they could be gay. Or they could be, a brown man. Like, I'm not just saying like, don't, whatever. But you can set those goals for yourself. And you can either say like, okay, I'm just going to take away like whatever the dominant paradigm. I'm not going to read books by the dominant paradigm. I'm going to read only books by everybody from every other marginalized group, which is it's a lot of books. You have a lot of choice, but you can also like really narrow it down. Because I was inspired to write that piece by people talking about challenges where they said themselves they only read books by women for a year, and how that changed a lot of their thinking. And these are people who are like, I'm a woman. And even I had to like actually actively think about like, wait a minute, how many books do I read by women versus men every year? And another person had done a reading challenge where they were only reading, people of color, for a year. And so, yeah, do that kind of thing. Now, you say, okay, well, but how do I find a bunch of books by Black people or by queer people or whatever? Well, literally Google. Like, that's literally the way to do it. If you Google, genre books by identity authors or genre, visual art by identity artists, you're gonna find lists. There are a lot of people out there who are making lists. They love to make lists like this. And so you're gonna find lists of like really great YA books by queer authors and really great mystery novels written by Black people or whatever it is, right? BuzzFeed actually does a pretty good job of this. Like, as much issue as I have with BuzzFeed in general, they do actually have some very good lists of books written, by genre, by identity of author, etc. Book Riot also is just like, that whole entire site is filled with those kind of lists, and those are all like really smart, great raters who are running Book Riot. Tor.com also will have lists. Nisi has an ongoing series at Tor.com right now about Black speculative fiction, correct?
Yes, and the list is also up at Carl Brandon Society's website. So it's a couple of different places.
Right. Another way to find like more new books or more new art or music or dance or whatever it is just to follow marginalized creators on social media, like we were saying, because when you do, they're going to boost the people that they know, and they are going to probably be boosting a lot more people from marginalized identities because they understand like we all have to sort of boost these things together. So yeah, go out of your way to do that, but it's not going to be hard for you to find the art that you're looking for. If you do that, you'll actually be surprised at how much great stuff is out there.
Um, then you can like do something that's even less spendy. You can request that your library purchase movies, books, comics, etc. by marginalized authors. So you're spending somebody else's money. Yeah.
I do like spending other people's money. um, so, and once you start reading these books or finding this other art that you love, just always promote them. Okay, promote those books and other pieces of art and stories and such by marginalized people. In particular, if you are researching and hoping to represent a specific group in your work, then spend a lot of time promoting the art by people from that group wherever you can. And this is like on social media or just talking to friends, or if somebody asks you for a recommendation, whatever platform you have, use it for that.
You can start your own list, you know?
Start your own list. You can
Um,
join Book Riot and then just list after list after list.
let's see, what else can you do? You can talk about it. Yeah. You can donate to fundraising campaigns for inclusive projects, anthologies, TV series, symposia, publication houses, and so on and so on. So if there's like a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo for a project that is really racially inclusive or inclusive along some other axis of difference, back it and promote the whole campaign. Yeah.
Yeah. Post reviews. And this one is one of those things that you always see authors being like, please give it a review. There's a reason for that. Reviews do have power to sway other audience members, other potential readers, or whatever. So definitely post reviews wherever you can. Amazon is a good place to post reviews. Goodreads for books, and sometimes even the Barnes and Noble review thingy. Although who's going to Barnes and Noble, I don't even know. But yeah, post reviews wherever you can because it does help increase visibility, and it can also like really help an author be like, well, my book has like a lot of 4-star, 5-star ratings. Like maybe
Yep.
you should give me more money, publishing house.
Yeah.
Those things help.
You can nominate things for awards. Um, there are so many awards that are open to nominations. Oh, actually, the Carl Brandon Society has two, but the nominations period just ended. But there are others. There's the Otherwise Award, formerly the Tiptree Award. Um, Nominate based on special identities, nominate based on just plain old, it's good. You can nominate for Hugo. You can nominate for all sorts of awards, and you can get a campaign going to do that, and then that sort of uplifts and raises the profile of whatever work you're nominating.
Yes. And then as we said, we know some of you out there are editors, but if you're any other kind of person who we call them gatekeepers, but most of the time we're calling them gatekeepers when we're mad at them. It's like, you're gatekeeping. But if you're an editor or other gatekeeper, no shade, seek out writing or, art or whatever by authors from marginalized groups that reflects their own experiences, and then include it. You know, this is true whether you are an editor of an anthology and you're looking for short stories. This is true if you are a book editor and you are looking for something to acquire. You, because of how things are right now, you sometimes are going to have to seek out those marginalized authors because for whatever reason they're not necessarily going to be able to come to you. If you are an agent, you got to seek out writers of color to represent sometimes because you know there are a lot of reasons why either an author of color may not even have queried you, they may not know who you are, they may have given up on finding an agent because of frustrations and because they just may have gotten the message, whether it's true or not, that nobody wants to, you know, represent their kind of work. And so whatever you have, you know, influence over, you need to start seeking out, because that is the way that you're going to be able to find people who have been told or have experienced oppression and they're just like, nope, you know, this artistic endeavor isn't for you. So you have to let them know, actually, this artistic endeavor is definitely for you. And whether or not that means that you say, okay, I'm an editor and I would love to acquire a book from you, but first, you know, agent, you know, whatever. But like, again, that goes back to sponsorship versus mentorship, giving them that information, helping to shepherd them through, or helping to hook them up with somebody who can help shepherd them through the process so that they can then get the book deal or get the gallery show or get the record deal or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So when you are published, when you are published, when you're out in the public eye, there are a number of things that you can do. You can use your platform to do things like if someone is praising a story that you wrote, be sure to say thanks. And also, have you read so and so? Do you know about this fiction author, this scholar, this primary resource? This is someone who I very much appreciated, and I want you to appreciate them too. So, you know, then you're like in a better place for making recommendations.
Yes. Um, One thing I want to back up a little bit because I realized I put a note in here that I didn't give Nisi. But I wanted to talk about this in terms of the thing about editors, and that is because I've been seeing a lot on Twitter, a lot of Black authors and other authors of color saying, yeah, I kept getting rejected for that because the editor was like, this is all very good writing and this is an interesting story, but I just couldn't connect with the voice. And I couldn't connect with the voice seems like shorthand for this is too brown for me, and I don't understand it. And this, so all of that ties into what we were talking about before, which is like, you know, gaining that greater understanding. You should never, as an editor, have only I couldn't connect with the voice as a reason why you're rejecting something, especially because that makes it sound like when you say I couldn't connect with the voice, that the writer did not write to the white gaze or to the mainstream gaze or whatever you want to label that, and that is the problem with their work. But that's not actually a problem with their work. You have to, what, and this is true for like whatever kind of person in a position of power that you have to broaden your horizon so that you can start connecting with voices that don't cater to you. That means reading more, viewing more, going to more performances that are outside of the kind of thing that you normally connect with, having conversations with other editors or other gatekeepers or other artists who will introduce you to different ways of looking at things and different ways of understanding and reading things or different ways of understanding and viewing things. All of that you need to do before you can go back to just saying, well, I didn't connect with the voice as a reason why you're rejecting something, because that's just shorthand for you're not doing the work, unfortunately.
Going back to what I was saying about if someone is praising your story or novel, you can recommend something else that's more, that's own voices, or that is someone from a marginalized group. You can also bring those sorts of authors to the attention of your agent. You can, your editor, your publisher, you can not just boost their presence and acknowledge their influence, but you can actively sponsor them.
Yeah. And you know, if you are an author or some other artist who has reached a level where you're in a position to say blurb a book or to endorse a show or you know whatever, and that thing that you do can have a real impact on sales, then do not let your agent, your manager, your editor, your whoever only send you things for that purpose by creators with privilege. Like make sure that they're sending you that kind of stuff from marginalized creators as well.
And when it's your turn to teach, this is me and Tempest practicing what we preach. Make sure the workshops and classes that involve you are doing everything in their power to make themselves available to and friendly to marginalized students. Make sure you know that you have some way that people who are impaired, sight impaired or hearing impaired can still engage in the class. Make sure that it's available to people who are caring for elders or children, and make sure that it's available financially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that has been a very important key. And I do want to pause here and again say thank you to all the people who are taking this and who bought the video, because a lot of that money is going to support our scholarship funds so that we can make our classes, which are expensive, available to more people who cannot afford them. And also to the Carl Brandon Society, which, among the other things that they do, provides scholarships to writers of color who want to attend Clarion and Clarion West writing workshops, which are, again, very expensive. And that is one of the things that keeps writers from being able to get education opportunities is money, because unfortunately not everything can be free, because everybody got to eat. We got to eat. People who run Clarion West got to eat. So everybody got to eat. So finding ways to make it, you know, available even to folks who cannot pay is super, super important for getting more marginalized people involved in helping them and being a good ally. So continue to donate to these kinds of things as you are able. All right, so now we've come to the final step before we take a break of 5 minutes. And that is step 4, come get your people.
I didn't want to call it that, but I did call it that.
What does that mean, Nisi, to come get your people?
Okay, so you've got this knowledge, you've got these new experiences, you've made these new connections. Now you want to share it with those who haven't had the benefit of that work, and people who are totally clueless. You can help them, you can drop them a few clues. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what, like sometimes this means like you'll often see Black people saying like white people come collect your cousins, like that's how we put it, because we're like we can't deal with these people, right? But so sometimes that means like actually engaging with people in public, in conversation, on social media or whatever. You want to make sure that like you are really thinking about, is this person just a troll, or our favorite bugaboo of the moment, the Russian bot? But like, is this person just a troll? Or are they just here to troll? Or are they somebody who genuinely is worth engaging with? And that's always a calculation you have to make when you do this. And so, yes, like once that is, so sometimes you got to do that. But a lot of this work actually you need to do outside of public view, if possible.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes this work is something that you have to do like with your literal family members, with your literal cousins and aunts and uncles and parents and grandparents and whoever. And you're not necessarily going to want to do this like on Facebook in front of everybody, right? Because that's not actually useful. But sometimes it's the other problem is that when people who are allies or who purport to be allies engage in doing this kind of education in a public way, sometimes they can be doing it because they just want the sort of kudos for being woke and aware and in public. And that's not what being a real ally is about. It's not, you know, getting cookies for what you do in public. And sometimes they can do what has been termed white knighting, which is they come writing in, they're like, I'm here to save the day. And everybody's like, we didn't ask you to come in and save the day. You're actually not helping right now. So that's again where that listening part comes in, right? Even like you can literally, even when you see something going down, like privately ask the marginalized person, especially if you know them, it's like, do you need me to step in or would you like me to just hang back? Like, tell me what to do, and whatever they need they'll let you know, especially if you have asked, because they're like, oh, okay, this person at least asked, so that I can say like, yes, could you please go handle this because I cannot talk to Karen anymore, I can't deal with it. So there are times when like doing it in public is good, but like often the whole thing happening in public can be more of a problem. It can be more about centering yourself instead of centering the person who's being harmed or the people who are being harmed. And so it is sometimes better to do these things in private. Take it to the DMs, take it to email, take it to in person, take it to whatever private group, and do that work of talking to people and sharing what you know and arguing with them and whatever. Because then, if you are doing it, first of all, out of the sight of people who will be harmed by the conversation, because those conversations can be really harmful, then you're helping to not re-traumatize marginalized people by having to have them watch the whole thing play out. And you're also decentering yourself by taking it away from the public. So if possible, if it's appropriate, doing this, coming for your people and collecting them and taking them aside and whatever, doing it outside of the public view can be sometimes better, because then it becomes about the work and not about you.
And I would add that if you are actually hopeful of somehow changing someone's mind, it's often better to do that in private also, because they're not necessarily feeling ashamed. They're just with you. They're not in the public eye, so they're not conscious of, well, I really messed up. They're just thinking about what is going on.
Yeah. All right. So we have come to the end of our talk, and we're going to take a 3-minute break, and I'm going to time it at 3 minutes. And then once we come back, then we will start getting Q&As from you guys. So I'm setting the timer for 3 minutes and go. Okay, 3 minutes is up. Welcome back. And I realized that I was able to change the setting on the chat so that attendees can chat with each other if you like, but Nisi and I will not be looking at that chat. All right, so before we begin Q&A, I'm just going to remind folks, because I know not everybody was here right at the beginning, but if you want to ask a question, please click the Q&A button to submit a question. And please only use the Q&A button for questions and not like saying thank you or chatting or anything like that. We want to use it just for questions. And then, but if you have a follow-up question, you can put it in the Q&A. Now we have an hour because we're going to go a little bit over because we had to start a little bit late because technical snafus with the YouTube. Thanks, YouTube. So we're going to try to devote a whole hour to Q&A. If there are questions at the end that we don't get to, Nisi and I may answer those later in text, and we may then send them to everybody, both video only participants and attendees today. All right, so I'm going to pop open the Q&A. Let's see. So someone asked, and I'm going to put answer live. Would you please include suggestions for Black or BIPOC activists to follow on social media in your follow-up mailer? Yes, we can do that. I can also give a few now. Obviously, you can follow me. You can follow Nisi. I'm at Tiny Tempest on Twitter, and Nisi is at Nisi Shaw. I also suggest following at Black Amazon, Sadet, who has been an activist for a really long time. Like she was doing, oh, I forget what her blog was, but she was also an angry something. I was an angry Black woman, and she was angry something else. Together, we fought crime. Mickey Kendall, whose handle is Carnithia on Twitter, is another great person to follow. And also her book, Hood Feminism, is also a really amazing read. And yeah, if you are interested in the intersection of race and feminism, that is an excellent book to read. Who else? Nisi, can you think of anybody off the top of your head?
I follow Magic Negro. That it's at Magic Negro. It's Alex Jennings. And who else? Oh, I don't remember her actual handle. It's Inda Lauren. She's good at retweeting stuff. She doesn't originate a lot of text, but she does hook me up with people who are doing stuff.
Yeah. So yes, we will include in the follow-up email some other suggestions as well. Cool. And somebody's asking where the quote that we read was from.
I answered that.
Oh, you answered? Okay, cool. Yeah. And again, we will link to that in the resources. So next question is, how does one apologize gracefully for something you've previously published, which you now recognize as problematic? Have you seen this done well?
Trying to think.
I have done well.
You know, I don't know. This is like not exactly the answer. I'm thinking of Ben Winters, who wrote a pretty prominent book about an alternate history where there was no end to enslavement. And someone said, you know, well, basically someone wrote an article about it like, you know, this modern look at enslavement has never been done before. Everybody's like, Octavia Butler, you know. And so what he did was apologize, but also pointed out that he hadn't actually written that. That he was not the one that said, you know, I'm there before Octavia. And you know, pointed out that he had written about Octavia's influence on him earlier. So he was apologizing, but he was also pointing out that it wasn't him. So I don't know if that counts.
I think it counts. One that came to mind was Karen Healy, but this is several years ago, and I'm not even sure like where you would find this. But Karen Healy is a YA author, and in one of her books, she depicted someone who was asexual, I want to say. It might be bisexual. Again, it's been a while, but the thing that I remember most about this is that Karen said, um, I've heard from people, I've heard from readers who read and they were hurt, or they thought that my representation wasn't good. And she said basically like, I am very sorry. Like I thought that I had done, what research I needed to do. Clearly I hadn't. Clearly I upset people. And so going forward, like I decided I'm going to learn. I'm going to listen and make sure that I don't make this mistake again. And there wasn't much she could do about the actual published book, but she said, going forward, I will not be making these same mistakes again. I hear you, and thank you for letting me know. And it wasn't defensive at all. It didn't say like, "Oh, you didn't understand my great thing." You should just be really happy that I, whatever. She said like all the things that yes that I would suggest to any of our students to say is that you apologize. You give a blanket like, I apologize, no qualifications or anything. And you say, I have read the criticisms. I'm going to continue to read so I can learn and do better in the future. And I will not be making this mistake again. Like that's it. Because unless you can actually go back and make changes, because like some people have done that. Some people like it's this I've seen this with short stories more than I've seen it with novels. But if you say are self-publishing your novel, you can just be like, I'm just going to take that down, fix it, and put it back up later. You can do that. Short stories can sometimes be revised, and then re-put up depending on what the publisher, magazine publisher wants to do, etc. But really, sometimes all you can do is apologize, say that, you're listening, actually do listen, try to learn, and then do better in the future. Next question. Do you recommend sensitivity readers for short fiction as well as novels? Are there any differences from what you discussed while talking about novels? Yes, I recommend sensitivity readers for any time. How about you?
I'm doing one now on a short story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not at this very moment, but this weekend.
While this webinar is happening, you're doing other multitasking.
Yeah, and the same thing. In lieu of getting paid myself, I'm asking the author to donate to the Carl Brannon Society.
Yeah, and there aren't that many differences. Except all the differences that come with like I'm reading a whole novel versus a whole short story. What they have to say is probably going to be a lot more lengthy for a novel. The fixes may be more complicated and involved for a novel than for a short story. And so I don't think that there's anything in particular you would need to say or ask differently. Do you agree with that, Nisi?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the only thing that makes a difference in a novel is that you have more material to look at. So, anything that stands out as weird or harmful can be mitigated by there's other material surrounding it that explains what's going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, no.
Okay. And also this person wanted to note that there's an increasing number of people who do sensitivity reading and they have established web pages for that, or it's on their web page. And so, yeah, asking Google, searching for sensitivity reader with Google may actually bring up people who do that. So thank you for that. Let's see. So here's a question about from somebody who's an editor, but they are not an acquiring editor, they're freelance editor. And so many of us are actually freelance copy editors or developmental editors. We don't know agents, we don't acquire or develop manuscripts. Where do you see support staff like us fitting into the publishing ecosystem? And what roles can we imagine playing to encourage and promote writers?
I can think of one right away. I have, and this is probably true for others as well, but I have run into issues with copy editors, for instance, where they question something that I have written that is culturally sound, but at odds with the mainstream. And so couching queries on this as queries rather than saying, well, this is, you don't need a comma here, this is grammatically incorrect, um, would be very helpful, just not wearing down the patience of those who are having to deal with this all the time. I think of instances like it's Daniel Jose Older who says, please stop italicizing all Spanish that Spanglish speakers use, and just easing back on that would really be helpful, ally.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, I think that, if you don't have the power to acquire books, like that's fine because you can just do, all the other stuff that we talked about. But and this is also going to be part of the answer to the next question. Just making sure that you read wisely enough in from authors of all different kinds, and immerse yourself in media of all different kinds of people so that you can then be more aware when like an author who comes through who's like their voice is a little bit different than you're used to, or they're using words a little bit differently than you would expect, that doesn't jar you. You can be like, oh, okay, and I get that, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
Educating yourself and broadening your own horizons, because then that may even like help you to then give them advice on how to make even those aspects of their writing better because you have that knowledge.
Here.
So this next question, it starts out with, I loved your pages, but could not connect to the voice of the protagonist, is a response I've gotten from more than a dozen American book agents. And I'm very sorry. I know that feel. I'm of South Asian origin, living in South Asia, writing about a butch lesbian teen. Yes. I recognize that this is systemic racism, but I want to know how I cannot do this as an ally. How do I shift my gaze apart from research reading, that is? And I still say like the answer to that is just still research and reading. That's the more you read, the more you're going to be able to be able to shift your gaze and recognize shifts in gaze and even analyze that, because you're a writer, so you're going to be analyzing anyway. So yeah, just like reading reading broadly.
And asking and couching your comments the way that you mark up the manuscript as queries rather than like top down hierarchical. It's supposed to be this way. It's like, is it my mapo, or is it her mapo, or is it the mapo, or is it just plain mapo? What is this person eating? And asking that rather than saying it should be mapo with no modifier.
And yeah, just on the part where people are saying they can't connect to the voice of your protagonist, sometimes that means that unfortunately you got to find agents who share more of your identity traits, which is, hopefully we won't have to keep doing that. Hopefully more agents will be able to widen their horizons and connect more with voices that don't cater to them. We can only hope. We're working on it. Okay, so next question. I'm an editor of a small semi-pro quarterly zine along with 3 other cis white ladies. We definitely want to intentionally publish more by POC. I know we read the slush through the prism of our experience/privilege. In addition to your guidance of pursuing these voices, do you have any suggestions on processes we can put in place to publish more by POC that isn't just tokenism? Is it okay to ask writers to identify when they sub? And have you ever considered offering and editing the other class? We'll talk about that in a second. And thank you for putting this together today. And I keep saying by POC, but that stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Just so for anybody who doesn't know. Nisi, do you have any suggestions?
Uh, yeah, actually, in addition to read widely, and keep an open mind, um, get another person to read. Um, try and find another slush reader that doesn't have the same prism that
Mm-hmm.
they're gazing through. Um, that could be enormously helpful. There's also something, I don't know how to put what I was doing with stories for Chip. Hey, I got to mention Samuel Delaney. Woohoo!
We
Bing,
went a
bing,
whole
bing, bing,
hour
bing.
and 24 minutes without mentioning it.
So I was editing an anthology dedicated to him, and some of the stories that came in were rougher than others. Um, but I had to adjust my vision and sort of do this thing where I was like looking at them through a different lens. That's all I can say. Not looking at, well, how does this deviate from the professionalism I expect, and instead looking at how does this deviate from the humdrum ho hum normal storyline, and looking for stuff that actually bugs you. That might be the way.
Mm, I agree with all of that. Essentially, the way to bring in other lenses is just to bring in other people, whether that be people who are like slushing and then passing up, or other people who are, sort of top level editors at your zine. And sometimes it can be that you bring in guest editors, right? And the more guest editors you bring in, the more stories that they're going to buy that you might say like, oh, that's interesting because I wouldn't have picked that story. And then you can then talk to the editor about like what it is about these stories that they picked that you may not have picked, and looking at like where
Yes.
that disconnect is, right? So you may want to start by having a few guest editors in, but then think long term about bringing in uh, more people of color, and more people from other marginalized backgrounds to be part of your editing team either permanently or temporarily. Because, and I have said this on Twitter several times, but I think at this point we have really reached the end of our need for all editors to be white people of whatever stripe, like whether that be white cisgender men, white cisgender women. Like, I feel like every magazine right now should have at least one person of color who has, can has editorial decision making possibilities, and then expanding that to other marginalized people. And that doesn't necessarily mean that like then you have like one, quarterly zine that's edited by 27 people, right? Like that's not realistic. But this is where like that guest editing comes in, and it's really great. I mean, I I have been a big fan of the Let's Destroy, whatever series that was started at Lightspeed Magazine, where it was Women Destroy, science fiction, and then fantasy, and then horror, and then it was People of Color Destroy, and then Disabled People Destroy. And with each of those, they brought in, people who come from those identities to do the editing. Like it wasn't, able-bodied people editing the, such and so, the Disabled People Destroy. It was disabled people who were doing that editing work. And even if they weren't people who were like on staff at the magazine, they were brought in for that, in recognition of the fact that they're going to see something different, they're going to read differently, they're going to have a different lens, and that is the lens that is needed for this particular project, right?
Yeah.
So you can do that, but then you can also just bring in people to edit who you say like, okay, we have a person of color who's editing, but we're not doing a whole issue of just people of color. We've just asked this person to come in and edit because we want to see what kind of things they're going to pull out of the slush. Anything else you want to add to that, Nisi?
Nope. I really like that. I like that expansion.
Cool. Um, let's see. I'm going to answer this question. Okay, so I live in the UK. I am a white person writing my first novel, and I got the idea to write about a Black British man of Jamaican descent who gets killed by police, and his son, whom he had with a white British woman, is therefore mixed race, seeking justice for his father. This is to highlight the fact that police killings, especially of people of color, happen in the UK too and are not talked about. Do you think it would be okay to write this story, doing the appropriate research and reality checks, and self publish it so I don't try to take up a spot with a publisher who could be giving it to a person of color instead? This is complicated.
This is why I'm going like,
There is a lot of stuff here. So I will start out by saying that if this is your first novel, this is a very ambitious first novel, because you're tackling a lot of stuff here. You're tackling a social issue, a major social issue. You're also writing from the perspective of a person who has a very different identity and point of view from you. And so getting that right is going to be difficult. It's going to take a lot of work. I won't say that you shouldn't do it. I won't say that you can't do it. I'm saying that it's going to take a lot of work. And so when you finish this, the the thing I'll say about, whether you should self-publish it or not, it's I think that you have to think about this not just from the like end point of when you're done with the novel and you feel it's publishable, but thinking about it actually as you are in this process of writing it. Like thinking about whether or not you're taking up a spot actually is not something that comes at the end of the process, but it's like at the beginning or in the midst of the process that you really need to be considering that. Would you agree, Nisi?
oh yeah, yeah. It's the kind of thing where you don't want to just invest the time and energy without realizing that it could be misplaced.
Mm-hmm.
From the very beginning.
I would say that, and this is something that actually I've been saying quite a bit lately, because we also said this when the whole thing with American Dirt came up, and I also was complaining a little bit about this yesterday about Kristen Bell's new children's book about purple people. And in that, if you want to highlight, if your goal is to highlight the fact that police brutality is an issue in the UK, just like it is in other places that get more sort of media attention for it, first thing to do would probably be to ensure that you know whether or not like that book has already been written. I mean, obviously it's not your specific book, right? But like, has a book been written by a Black person from the UK or another person of color from the UK about the experiences of people in the UK dealing with police brutality and other abuses? Because even if you haven't heard of it, it doesn't necessarily mean that one hasn't been written from somebody from within those communities. And seeking out what has already been written and possibly published, talked about, whatever, and seeing like what you can bring that isn't covered there. Because this is not to say like, you can't do any particular story, because everybody's going to tell even the same stories in different ways and can bring out different things. Like there's always value in a lot of different tellings, right? But you don't necessarily want to step into a space thinking that it's empty when actually it's already quite crowded. It's just that you haven't heard of it. So is it better for you to bring more attention to those books where you can? Possibly. If you read those books and you still feel like the story that you want to tell is something different, something that you still feel needs to be said, like that's cool. But then you also have the background of having read those books by people from those communities that are affected, and that's maybe going to change how you feel about your own novel, about the plot, structure, or characters, and that can only help inform you. Yeah, so that's my advice. Nisi, do you have any further?
No, but I would certainly be looking to a sensitivity reader. Well, probably a cultural consultant right from the get-go.
Yeah. You don't have to wait until a manuscript's done to bring in a sensitivity reader, because I've done sensitivity reads on very fleshed out synopses before.
Yep.
All right. This question, does it make a difference when writing the other which person you use? Like, does writing in first person feel more authoritative than writing in third person, for example? And this
That
I know is a more crafty question. But I want to answer it because it's one of the things where people do worry about whether or not like which verb tense they use is going to be better for one thing or another. And I don't actually think that that matters. It's more what you do with it. Do you agree, Nisi?
I think it depends totally on the story that you're telling. I mean, I don't know about anything feeling more authoritative. I would say probably a first person, actually writing outside my own identity, writing as a writing in first person. I would feel that I was probably more likely to be questioned as to whether that was whether I was appropriating culture. Um, but point of view is something that is so intrinsic to the story. So um, I'd need more information.
Cool. Oh, let me mark that as done. All right, next question. This one is a little bit long. Um, regarding Hiromi Goto's list of questions, I really like them, and there are some elements that may be uncomfortable for some authors to consider, which may be the point. I have a feeling that questions 3 and 4 may be, in particular, really challenging sometimes for people to think about. And for some, when a question is uncomfortable, the immediate reflex is to avoid really diving into and reflecting on the question, which can lead to facile or shallow answers. People may reflexively sidestep, avoid, get defensive, because white fragility is a thing. So I wondered if you might have any thoughts about possible ways of diving deeper into these questions, whether for white writers trying to reflect on it themselves or for bringing up those questions with other white writers. Whether that might be restarting, reframing, giving possible examples of how things might go wrong, examples from history or the recent past, or other ways to really try to probe into the question. If it makes my confused question any clearer, I'm asking this primarily because I've recently attempted to discuss these questions with fellow white writers about projects they are planning, and I found a tendency to reflect, sidestep, or otherwise not really fully acknowledge those questions, which in turn means not really engaging with them.
I guess I need in my outline, questions 3 and 4 are: who will benefit if you write the story, and why are you writing this story? And they're so different. Who will benefit if you write this story? That is a very, very specific question to ask about each story. Is it going to make money? Is it going to highlight a particular aspect of history? Is it going to make certain communities stand out? Or is it going to mush together communities? So those are all very, very specific questions. And I think the way to react to someone avoiding them is to break them down. You know, like, who do you what's the royalty that you're getting for this, and what's the advance, and all that kind of stuff. Number 4, why are you writing this story? That is so broad. That is such a broad question. That's the kind of thing that you like, if you meditate, you can sit there under the tree with your hands like this and try and figure out why you're writing the story for a whole day. So the tactic of getting tighter and tighter focus on that is not probably going to help. Probably asking it in different ways, rather than breaking it down, you know. Yeah, why are you writing this could become, why are you not writing this? I mean, that one would be hard to get people to face, I'm thinking. What do you think, Tempest?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. It's like, there's a lot of nuance there and it can be very complicated. And yeah, sometimes just getting into, because like those questions are very sort of like, they're like the little tip of the iceberg and then the rest of it is way under here. So for yourself, or for the people, digging a little bit further into the iceberg and reframing it and just getting behind, like, what's behind this question. What's behind the question of who benefits, and what's behind it is basically saying, are only people who are from the dominant paradigm, who are from the people who have greater social capital in the place where you are or where you'll publish, are they going to benefit more than the people who are marginalized? And then what is behind that? What is behind that benefit? What is behind, like, then you have to examine, like, why is it not a good thing for that to be the case, that people who are marginalized don't benefit? And so, like, once you start getting behind the questions, that might be a way to, like, dig deeper into them and reframe them. But I don't think that it will necessarily help with the kind of questions or the kind of conversations that you're having, because like, the first thing is you have to get past people's defensiveness and white fragility, and that's really hard. um and sometimes it's not possible to do in a way that will result in sort of immediate satisfaction. Sometimes the only thing that you can do is to, have those conversations and then walk away and let them sit.
Yeah.
And then the other person will have to also sit with it and will also have to think about it. And not everything can be solved in a day in one conversation. Sometimes it takes time, and it just takes you modeling the kind of behavior that you want to see from that person, and you, like, even talking about, like, okay, I asked these questions of myself and here's what I came up with and here's what I struggled with, and I had these conversations and I read this stuff, and you just telling other writers that those things that you have done, even if they are not ready to have that conversation with you at whatever time, it may mean that they rethink, they get past their defensiveness, because that takes time, um, and reconsider, and then later come back to you and they say, you're really right to, like, put me on the spot about that. And I've thought about it, and I've thought about it in terms of my work, and I think I'm ready to do something different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like that. We're not always all ready to hear everything that we hear. Sometimes we have to play it back, a few weeks, a few years later.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that that answered your question. Oops. What is the next one? How can a publishing house keep itself open for feedback beyond the feedback a reviewer may give on a book that's already been published?
I think I need to get back to that. What? How can a publishing house keep itself open for feedback beyond the feedback a reviewer may give on a book that's already been published? I don't know. This seems like a really abstract question to me, and I'm not.
Well, the only thing I can think of is that you, as if you're asking from the perspective of a publisher, then to have, you know, a contact, have your contact information readily available somewhere, even if it's a form, and actually read and respond to what comes in, because like that's basically the other way people get feedback is they email and they're like, this is terrible or whatever. Maybe they don't say this is terrible, they say this is great and I'm so happy. But giving people the ability to leave that feedback privately, you know, via email or whatever, I think is the best way, other than reviews. But you have to, the publisher has to be reading those emails and not just letting them go into the deep dark hole, and they have to act on them. Also being, you know, depending on the size of the publisher, because like, so the publishing account for Penguin Random House is not run by anybody who has any decision-making ability at Penguin Random House, right? So if you tweet at Penguin Random House, the poor social media person is gonna be like, who did something on Twitter? Now I have to deal with it. But like, they can't actually make decisions, right? But you know, depending on the size of the publisher, having social media channels, or other community channels where people can come in and they can talk about books and they can also give feedback seems like a good idea, but then it has to be managed. Communities require management or else they devolve into screaming matches and trolls and advertisers.
What about like going to conventions or conferences? Do publishers do that? Yeah.
Editors do. I don't know how many publishers do. Like, I only know of one publisher who regularly goes to cons, and he's weird. Um, but editors definitely go to cons, and yeah, that's another place where they can be open to feedback from readers about the stuff that they publish.
Yeah.
Cool. Next question. It's about sponsorship versus mentorship. Can institutions such as publishers or professional organizations organize sponsorship programs in place of mentorship programs, or do you think sponsorship should be behind the scenes or more personal?
I think it should be more personal. And I think that there's certainly room for people who are in a mentorship program to become sponsors.
Yeah, there just has to be a path for that, and that there has to be a discussion of whether or not that's an expectation of mentors that they could become sponsors later, or that might be expected of them. But yeah, it does seem like the sponsorship thing is more personal, if only because like you're talking about somebody who you would like to shepherd, to be a shepherd through your career. And so yeah, it's hard to do that when it's just like, we've matched you up with random person.
Yes.
Because sometimes a lot of times sponsorship is about relationships, and that doesn't mean that you have to have a prior relationship before sponsoring somebody, but it does require building a relationship.
Yep. Oh no, I'm sorry.
You don't have to do that one. All right, I'm going to answer this one. Or we can answer it. I want to review more works by marginalized writers on my blog, but how do I do this without being all, look at me, since a review is inherently through the filter of my perspective?
Can you have guest reviewers? Because if you can do that, then you are automatically not doing the look at me, you're doing look at them.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also do it yourself and own up to the fact that, hey, this is somebody that's outside this group and here's what I think of what I'm reading.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that it's fine to do more yourself, but also bring in other people every now and then. But also the whole point is for you to like the more you read, the more you're going to be able to shift your perspective. And that's an important part too. So, yeah, owning up to the perspective that you have, but also over time, you're going to build up new perspectives from reading so many more people of different backgrounds.
Cool.
Um, how can an author write a white main character who is a great ally without accidentally creating a white savior?
Accidentally?
I
Sorry.
mean, yeah, you don't want them to end up as a white savior not on purpose.
Okay, so all the stuff that we were talking about for you should apply to the character too. They should listen. They should pay attention to what they hear. They should ask when people need help or not. Um, they should own up to their own privilege.
And I think that they should, even if they are a main character, the solution or the conclusion or whatever should not come solely from them if you want to avoid white saviorness. I often think about, when thinking about stuff like this, um, ensemble pieces, and your piece doesn't need to be an ensemble piece, but one of the great things about ensemble pieces is how it showcases that teamwork is awesome. And it sometimes takes, more than one different type of person to be able to get some stuff done. One of my favorite ensemble things is Leverage, the TV show called Leverage. And that TV show is great on a number of levels, in lots of different ways. But one of the ways that makes it great is that every person who is on that team contributes to winning in the end. It's very rarely that one of them is the one who solves everything, saves the day, whatever it is. And it can be argued that in that show, Nate Ford, who's the mastermind character, is the protagonist, but he's certainly not the most interesting character in that group. And also, he couldn't win the day without literally everybody else on that team. So even if you have a white main character, and even if they are great at things and whatever, they can be a great ally while also not being the sole person who has solved the problem, the sole person who has made everything better, the sole person who has done whatever. They can be part of a group, and it can be somebody else. And it can be about them being a good ally to that somebody else who made everything possible.
Yeah, that whole individual hero saves the day narrative, even without it being the white savior trope, it's really tired as far as I'm concerned, and it's also one of the foundations of patriarchalist storytelling. So you could dump that, sure.
Yes, and we have a class coming up. It hasn't been announced yet, but we have a class coming up about different kinds of narrative structures that go beyond that sort of Western lone hero does all the whatevers, taught by Henry Lian. So yeah, if you're on our announcement list, you will get the announcement when that class is up for the registration is open. All right. Next question. As a writer, I find that to do the quality of work I want to do, I need to dedicate all of my time and energy to writing, reading, researching, etc. But in a moment like this, that can feel so inadequate, even as I dive deeply into questions of identity in the written work. Do you have thoughts on what is the responsibility of the allied artist when it comes to apportioning their time? Do we have a responsibility to, quote, leave the room?
So there, I have been hit very hard emotionally by first all of this crap going on with a pandemic, and then all these protests, and I I am not able uh, physically to go out and protest. So I really take exception to the idea that I have a responsibility to do that. As a person of color, I see myself needing self-care, and writing is actually one of the things that makes me calmer, that makes me able to go to sleep at night, able to wake up in the morning. So um, there's always self-care. There are other ways of supporting change and making sure that it happens without without uh, without tearing yourself away from the stuff that you know how to do and that you are good at doing. Um, I don't know. What do you say, Tempest? Because I'm sure you have other ideas on this topic too. And also, what is this leave the room? What is that? You're muted.
Sorry. I think that like the metaphorical, like, do we have the responsibility to just like let other people handle it? Um, I I mean I agree with a lot of what you said, and I also just it's hard because I think that whatever responsibility artists have is going to depend on what what their medium is, what their genre is, what their place in the community is, what you know what your own internal ability to do is, right? And um you don't necessarily like that whole thing where I was talking about like not everybody has to be a warrior, not everybody has to apportion their time in the same way. You have to like work at like what you are able to do, like because everybody has different mental health considerations. Everybody has different like stress levels, everybody has different things that they also have to deal with. Like, are you working another job while you're trying to do your art? Do you have children that you need to care for? Do you have elders that you need to care for? Right. So it's that I don't think that there's any um, responsibility to apportion your time in a specific way. It's like what you first have to do is you have to make sure that like whatever time you have, whatever resources you have, that you give give of that what you can,
Yeah,
but you don't necessarily have to feel like you have to be on it all the time and be on it everywhere. And sometimes it's not even appropriate. So yeah, I think it goes back to like listening. What is needed from the people in your community or the global community that you are connected to via social media, and then what can you do within what is needed, and don't be afraid to also then step back when you need to, because that's another thing that people who are activists have to learn too, is when to take a break.
yeah.
Taking a break is super important.
And I also feel like there's something going on when my voice is stifled, when my artistic and creative output is muffled, is silenced, and I don't like that something. So the defiance inherent in creating art that is in resistance, I think that's important to keep in mind.
Hmm. And another thing is that whatever you're doing is not inadequate, as long as you're doing something, and as long as you are engaged in learning and understanding and bearing witness and saying, what can I do? That's not inadequate at all. All right. Uh, so I'm going to say, because this is 3 minutes till the end of our like time, the time we said, but as I said, we were going to go over a little because we started a little bit late. But also, I don't know what your bandwidth is, Nisi, but I would like to try to get through as many of the questions that we have in the queue right now, but just to say no more questions going forward, just because there's a lot to answer.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to get through as many of these questions as possible, but as I said, we may have to do some later on, and we'll send you the answers in text.
Right.
Okay.
I agree.
So, next question is, come get your people. See, I told you, Nisi, we should is one of the toughest things, and I'm so glad you bring it up. A lot of times that white fragility comes into play because even when you call people, such as family members, on things in private, they'll gaslight you and say they don't know what you're talking about and get defensive. Do you have any suggestions for how to gracefully circumvent gaslighting from others who refuse to acknowledge real experiences? Or is that one of the times when you should decide whether it's worth engaging?
Um, I'm trying to think of examples in my own life when I've had to deal with this. And the best policy for me has been let me know when you want me to corroborate this. Let me know when you're ready to hear more about this. Because you can't gaslight someone who is sure of themselves. And I am pretty much sure of myself when I'm speaking on some of these issues to family members and to people who are just kind of outside of it. And yeah, and then disengage because I have other stuff to do. You know, I have a book to write, and I have soup to make, and so yeah, so offer, to re-engage at a later point, and say that I can back my claims up, but throw up the deuces, say peace.
Yeah, I mean, when I have had terrible arguments with racists, no matter, there comes a point where no matter what you say or no matter how many times you're like, but I have evidence to back this up, they'll be like, no, no, you don't, or whatever. And then you just have to, yeah, you just have to stop, because they're either going to come to a different conclusion on their own, or they're going to keep thinking the way they think. And there's nothing that you can do to force it either way. All you can do is give information and say, yeah, I'm here when you're ready to talk about these things. So I agree with
Yeah,
Nisi.
yeah, when you're and keeping it open, yeah, when you're ready, I'll be here.
What happens when you write an identity and some people feel like it captures their experience, but others feel like it doesn't? There is an idea of the burden of representation of whole groups placed on a story, which cannot be feasible. So then the question becomes who and what to listen to. And yeah, this is actually a big one for allies, especially when you have some allies saying, this, okay, like I've been told by my trans friends or my black friends or whoever that this is the way that we need to talk about this issue, and these are the terms that we need to use, and these are the articles that we need to share. And then somebody else who's from the identity in question comes along, they're like, no, that's not, no, that's not it, and I disagree, and I'm offended, and so then like it can become confusing because you're just like, I'm just trying to do the right thing over here. And it's the same with stories where you'll have a story, as you said, written, and some people from that identity are like, this is great and this captures how I feel, and other people are like, that's terrible. um so I wrote an essay for Lit Reactor called Representation Matters. And I will include this in the resources. But in that essay on Representation Matters, I do address this. And I talk about how sometimes you can write a character from an identity that's different from your own, that people from that identity are like, this is wonderful and we love it. And then other people with that identity may come along and say, no, no, this is not right and this is terrible. Or it may happen further down the line. May happen 10 years later, 20 years later. This happens to Neil Gaiman more often than it should. So the thing that you can do is, you apologize. You acknowledge that not everyone's experiences is the same, right? Like some people are going to like it, some people aren't, no matter what you do. It also helps when you don't include only one of that identity in your work,
Yeah,
because when you do that, people who are from that identity will tend to over-identify with them because that's the only representation they get. And so they pin all their hopes on that one character. And then when bad things happen to the character, or the character doesn't act in a way that they like, or a character doesn't act in a way that they think is appropriate for that identity, then you have problems, right? But if you have multiple people from that identity in your work, that tends to happen less, because then it's not just one character, right, who's like I said, carrying the burden of representation for a whole group. And so including multiple characters, even if, you know, some of them are secondary or whatever, the other thing to remember with that is that you don't have to, like, the identities are intersectional. So say like,
Yes.
I want to include like a Black person in my story. I could include 3 Black people in the story. It's like 3 whole Black people, but I also need a person who's disabled. It's like, Black people come in disabled. But I also need a gay guy. Black people come in gay. We come in all the flavors. Every identity has multiple intersections. So just because you need to include more Black people in your piece doesn't mean you need to take out all the other identities. Multiple identities in one person. Everybody has multiple identities. It's just that sometimes some of those identities are considered mainstream or dominant paradigm, so they're not marked. But everybody has multiple intersections of identity. So that's one way to help with that. And getting, if you can, multiple sensitivity readers, so you get multiple points of view from people from an identity. Anything you want to add, Nisi?
I have nothing to add to that.
Okay. All right. Next question. I am a white woman and I welcome correction of my understanding and the framing of my question. My understanding is that white women have long held an unearned, dominant, and privileged position in young adult literature. I see that this is changing, but it's an ongoing problem. It seems to me that every time a white woman gets published, she is occupying space, even if her book is miraculously free of harmful content and or has helpful content. You have already offered some very helpful advice on ways we can work to change this inequity, such as sponsorship, promoting other voices to publishers and agents. Is there anything else you would like to see white women do to address and change our position in the industry? So, the first thing I want to say is that the part where you say like, whenever a white woman is publishing, she is taking up space, but like, taking up space flat out in general is not the problem. It's when we talk about taking up a space, we're talking about like, are you taking a space away from someone else by doing what you're doing? And specifically, because yes, someone else is too broad. Specifically, are you taking away space from a marginalized creator with the book that you're publishing, the art that you're making, whatever, right? Because not, I mean, yeah, every book takes up space, every person takes up space, but whether or not they're taking up of a space is causing structural harm depends on what they're writing and what they're doing. Okay. So we're not saying like white people quit taking up space, disappear, like all the atoms should go somewhere else. The taking up space thing is specifically about, are you with your work taking something away, space away from a marginalized creator that they might otherwise have a shot at? And that's, we ask you to ask that question of yourselves, but sometimes that the answer to that is not dependent on you. It's dependent on the publisher. It's dependent on the editor. You know, we still live in a world, and thankfully this is changing, but we still live in a world where editors will say, oh, we already have a Black book this season. We don't need another Black book. That Black book was written by a white person, but we still don't need another Black book this season. So like the whole idea of taking up space is when you have people at higher levels saying, well, we can only have this many books that fit into these specific categories. And then perhaps people who, if that's going to be the case, which is, we also want to eliminate that as the case, but if that is going to be the case, then those slots for the one Black book and the one you know, disabled book or whatever probably should go to like Black people or disabled people, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're talking about more, is taking up space, not just like in general that white people are just, white people existing is taking up space.
They're
Nisi,
everywhere.
how did they get in all these places? Anyway, Nisi, do you want to tackle the part of the question where changing the inequity?
I don't know. I think I have an idea of who wrote this actually, even though it says anonymous on there. And so this is someone in my imagination that actually has quite a bit of leverage. One thing that we haven't talked about at all is the possibility of writing together, of collaborating, and that might be a way of bringing someone more to the fore if you are, as I think, someone who has a few books under their belt.
Yeah. I can't think of anything other than the ways that we've talked about, but also maybe just like in terms of the work that you do on your with yourself is reframing the thought that that whatever you're doing is a problem unless it's been called out specifically as a problem, and more focusing on like what can you do to solve problems, and yeah, use your platform to solve problems. You know, one really great example of this, and I agree with Nisi, by the way, I'm like talking about collaborating, like sometimes, yeah, collaborating so that you can bring somebody else in. Since you have a lot of clout, you can like, hello, I would like to bring this other person in to do these things. So, but a really great example of using your clout, Rick Riordan.
Yes,
Rick
I was
Riordan
just thinking about that.
made a whole bunch of money off of his books that were based on Greek mythology, I think, and I think that there were some
Yeah.
that also delved into Egyptian mythology. But so Rick Riordan made a lot of money, got a lot of clout. His publisher's like, "We love you, Rick Riordan. Take all our money." And he's like, "Hmm." And when people said, "Okay, it's kind of messed up that you're dipping into these mythologies. They're living mythologies, and some people are still very culturally connected to these. And what are you doing?" And so he was like, okay, so I'm going to have my publisher create an imprint just for me, and I'm going to publish books where people have, middle grade kids going on adventures using, these different mythologies or spiritual traditions or cultural traditions, whatever, but written by the people from those cultures. I'm going to give those people money. And so if you look at the Rick Riordan Presents imprint, it is nothing but awesome middle grade novels where people from its own voices, that person from that culture is writing about their cultures or the cultures that they know really well, and putting adventures in, with middle grade kids in them. And that is the way that Rick Riordan had used his platform to do that thing. Not everybody can get their publisher to create an imprint just for them. That's definitely some higher level thing that you can do, but think big along those lines. Think about like, how do I maybe bring along more people who are not necessarily getting past the gatekeepers? What can I do? Maybe I can collaborate with them. Maybe, depending on how popular your book series is, you can say, okay, I want to have other people writing in my world. I believe this is what Cassandra Clare did. And I issues with Cassandra Clare, but I do believe that like one of the things that she did was she started bringing in other people from other identities to write in her world, to write characters who come from the identities of the people who are writing them. And that was something within her power to do. She has a lot of clout. She doesn't necessarily have Give My Own Imprint clout, but she has, I can have other people write in my world clout. She used it. So thinking along those lines, like what can you do with your clout?
I've got to go pretty soon because I
Okay.
actually have another meeting.
Not another meeting. Okay, so I think I'm looking very quickly through the rest of the questions. And I think what we're going to have to do is, yes, we're going to have to take these questions to text and to answer them and send you all a document with the answers to these questions that we still have left. And so I'm copying the questions right now so that I have that. So just give me a second. Cool. Okay. And so with that, we will send those questions a text. And for those people who are only getting the video, we will also send you the answers to the questions that we have in text. We always have like so many more questions than we can actually get to, but
Yep.
hopefully within what we have said and the questions that we have already answered, we have given you good foundation for what it takes to be an ally. I also want to mention that we have Writing the Other has other classes that are coming up. We have a class next weekend. Nisi is talking about narrative voice, inclusive narrative voice. Next month, we have a class starting on writing dialect and dialogue. We also have the Henry Leanne class that I mentioned. Later on in the year, we have a class on how to research. If you're a writer and you've never been taught researching skills, super useful. So we have a class on that. And then we also have a class on world building for those of you who are speculative fiction authors. And so, yeah, you can see all of our classes that are available for registration right now are up on our website. If you did not ask to be put on our announcement mailing list, you can go to writingtheother.com/subscribe to get on the mailing list to learn more about all of these different classes. And just so you know, the getting the video of this webinar, that registration link is going to be open actually until August 31st. So if you enjoyed this webinar, please do tell all your friends and tell them to get the video, because purchases of the video, half of that money goes to our scholarship program so that more people can take our classes, and the other half goes to the Carl Brandon Society for their programs. So Nisi, do you have any last thoughts before we go?
No, I'm just really, really encouraged to see the interest in this. That's all. You guys are great, and you're going to do really well.
Yes, yes, we believe in your ability to be great allies. So thank you all for coming, and we will see you hopefully on the internet and hopefully in more classes, and go out there and just be awesome. All right.